Welcome to The Explainer. So, for months now, we've all been watching this incredibly tense, finger on the trigger stalemate between Washington and Tehran. Everyone has been holding their breath. But just when we thought the players on the board were firmly set, the world's largest oil importer finally lost its patience and stepped right into the arena. That's right, China has officially entered the fray. And they aren't asking for permission, they are making demands. Today, we're mapping out this battle for the Strait of Hormuz, and we're going to break down exactly what this sudden intervention means for the future of global power and economic stability. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our map for today. First, we'll examine the vital energy chokehold. Then, we'll track the global economic shockwaves, analyze Beijing's diplomatic intervention, break down Washington's strategic dilemma, and finally, look at the new Gulf security era. Section 1. The vital energy chokehold. The world's most critical artery. And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the issue. Look at that 20%. We are talking about fully 1/5 of the entire world's oil and liquefied natural gas flowing through this single, incredibly narrow geographic choke point. I mean, think about the global supply chain for a second. Having 20% of the planet's critical energy supply dependent on a strait that is currently paralyzed, it's a literal logistical nightmare. For global leaders and economic planners, you have to understand this isn't just some distant regional dispute. It is the most critical energy artery on Earth being pinched completely shut. Section 2. Global economic shockwaves. Prices surge worldwide. Since this blockade kicked off in late February, commercial shipping through the strait has been effectively paralyzed. And man, the domino effect has been swift and brutal. We're seeing surging energy prices worldwide. It's actually an incredible example of global interconnectivity. A standoff in the Persian Gulf is causing immediate, painful impacts right at the gas pumps across the American South, while simultaneously threatening industrial production in the massive factories of Shanghai. But here is the absolutely critical distinction we need to make. For many Western nations, this is a painful economic headache. For China, however, this closed strait represents an absolute existential threat to their entire economic engine. They literally cannot afford for this artery to stay severed. So the crucial point is found in this direct quote from Beijing during the latest round of Iran talks. Reopen the strait as soon as possible. Notice the phrasing there. This isn't some polite diplomatic suggestion. It's a mandate entirely driven by economic survival. China's economic engine fundamentally depends on those shipping lanes, and they are now throwing their considerable weight around to force the issue. Section 3. Beijing's diplomatic intervention. The economic lever. Let's break down the actual mechanics of this intervention. Step 1. China is partnering up with Pakistan, engaging in this highly delicate behind-the-scenes mediation process. But step 2 is where the real power lies. China is heavily leveraging its status as Iran's primary, most lucrative customer. They are essentially deploying their very own version of maximum pressure. But instead of using aircraft carriers, they're using purchase orders and trade dependencies to force a resolution. They're basically telling Tehran that the economic lifeline they provide comes with strings attached, and right now, that string is reopening the strait. And you know, this single fact is exactly why global leaders are paying such incredibly close attention to this development. Beijing's diplomatic surge directly challenges Washington's traditional role as the sole mediator and ultimate authority in the Persian Gulf. For decades, right, the U.S. has been the undisputed heavyweight in Middle Eastern security. So China stepping in and potentially successfully negotiating an end to this blockade, that would signal a massive historic transfer of geopolitical influence. Section 4. Washington's strategic dilemma. Maximum pressure tested. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how plainly it contrasts two completely competing global doctrines right there in the Gulf. On one side, you have the traditional U.S. approach, which is heavily reliant on military deterrence and tactical operations. We're talking about initiatives like Project Freedom, Operation Epic Fury, and that overarching strategy of maximum pressure. It's a huge show of force meant to compel behavior. And then, on the other side, there's the Chinese approach, diplomatic mediation paired with immense economic leverage. We're literally watching a real-time stress test between Western military dominance and Eastern economic persuasion. To see how this is all playing out, let's quickly map the timeline. In late February, the Hormuz blockade begins. Tension absolutely spikes. Weeks later, the U.S. takes direct action, disabling an Iranian-flagged tanker in the Gulf of Oman and maintaining its own blockade on Iranian ports. But then look at the most recent development. Amidst China's very loud calls for this standoff to end, Trump suddenly pauses Project Freedom, which is the exact operation designed to guide ships out of the Gulf.
This sudden strategic pause raises a massive question for global analysts. Is the effectiveness of Washington's maximum pressure actually waning? Is China's immense economic gravity forcing the U.S. to the negotiating table faster than they intended?
Section 5. The New Gulf Security Era. A Nightmare Scenario. Objectively speaking, if you're a traditional Washington insider, this represents an absolute nightmare scenario. Because if China successfully mediates the reopening of the strait, they don't just get their oil flowing again. No, they officially establish themselves as the new guarantor of security in the Middle East. It would represent a fundamental dismantling of the US-led security doctrine that has pretty much defined the region for over half a century. Let's move to and see how this builds into immediate, actionable strategic impacts for global leaders. First off, having a third superpower at the table completely complicates U.S. mediation and significantly dilutes Washington's leverage. I mean, what happens to the highly anticipated trillion-dollar deal? Its feasibility is now heavily questioned under these brand new power dynamics. And perhaps most importantly, look at regional alliances. Nations all across the Gulf are watching this very closely. If China can guarantee security through economic means, we might start seeing a massive pivot away from exclusive reliance on the United States, and that fundamentally alters the risk calculus for literally any international business or government operating in the region. So we've tracked the data, we've analyzed the strategies, and it really all boils down to this one crucial question. Are we just seeing a temporary intervention to clear a regional traffic jam, or is this the start of a brand new Cold War in the Persian Gulf? As global leaders actively assess these geopolitical risks, a critical choice emerges. Should the U.S. and its allies accept China's new role as a Middle Eastern power broker, or push back to maintain the old order? It's a huge question and one that's going to define the next decade of international relations. We'll be keeping a very close eye on the data as the story develops. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.